November 16th. Wait. Sorry. December 16th, 1944. Schnell, early morning in Monschau, Germany. The frozen earth trembled beneath another scream of American artillery. But this morning something terrifyingly different was happening. The shells did not simply slam into ground or trees. They detonated above the German formations, bursting in midair and sending a lethal rain of metal fragments down into positions that no foxhole could truly shield. Men of the 326th Volksgrenadier Division, attacking the 38th Cavalry Squadron, many hardened by the Eastern Front, stared at a new kind of death they could not reconcile with their experience. These were not the predictable impact patterns they had learned to read. The safe hollows, the places to hunker down. This was precision slaughter from above. At the heart of that moment was a single, unauthorized choice by Colonel Oscar Alfred Axelson of the 406th Artillery Group. Defying standing orders and bypassing higher command, he told his crews to load and fire shells fitted with the Allies' most closely guarded secret, proximity fuses. Small radar-like devices that sensed distance to a target and detonated the shell at the optimal height, multiplying artillery lethality by an order of magnitude. The mathematics of killing had been rewritten in the frozen Ardennes. German soldiers had no idea they were facing a weapon so revolutionary it would not only reshape this battle but alter modern warfare itself. Operation Watch on the Rhine, Hitler's last grand gamble, had opened with terrifying promise for the Wehrmacht. 200,000 troops, 1,000 tanks, and nearly 2,000 artillery tubes masked in Ardennes fog. The Führer boasted the offensive would split Allied armies and seize Antwerp, reversing a war that was slipping away. At 5:30 on December 16th, the German barrage achieved tactical surprise. Along an 85-mile front, artillery fired at a rate of roughly 1,600 rounds per minute. American intelligence had failed to detect the buildup. Many frontline units were green replacements or exhausted veterans left in a quiet sector to rest. At Monschau, however, Colonel Axelson confronted an impossible problem. The small 38th Cavalry Squadron was being overrun by superior German forces and conventional counter-battery fire could not stop the assault. In desperation, he made his historic call: fire the secret proximity-fused shells without formal authorization. He later risked court-martial for that decision. But in that instant he understood that blind obedience meant defeat. The result was immediate and horrific. German assault formations found themselves under airbursts detonating 30 to 50 feet overhead, each blast throwing a cone of shrapnel over vastly greater area than any ordinary ground burst. Veterans who knew how to shelter from conventional barrages were cut down in foxholes, behind trees, in ditches, anywhere they had thought themselves safe. The proximity fuse was the product of American scientific daring matched to industrial scale. Unlike contact or time fuses, the proximity device contained a compact radar system small as a coffee can that could sense its distance to the ground or to troops and detonate at the most deadly height. Inside each fuse, engineers packed some 130 electronic parts, tiny vacuum tubes among them, redesigned to survive the punishing 20,000 G forces of artillery launch. The physics were brutal. On firing, the acceleration crushed a glass ampoule, creating a battery that powered the fuse's radar for the shell's flight. This work was driven with Manhattan Project intensity at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory under Dr. Merle Tuve. The laboratory, disguised as a rundown used car lot in Silver Spring, Maryland, employed an astonishing share of the nation's physicists and ran under extreme secrecy. Workers could not discuss their tasks even with family. Each fuse carried a serial number for tight tracking. Designing vacuum tubes that could survive cannon launch, spin at murderous RPMs, function in any weather, avoid premature bursts, yet remain sensitive enough to detect targets. The engineering challenge had seemed nearly impossible. And yet it was solved. In the frozen timber of the Ardennes that morning, the secret science of the proximity fuse was unleashed, changing the battle, the Bulge, and the nature of artillery forever. The breakthrough emerged from the same miniaturization advances that would soon reshape the entire electronics world. Dr. James Van Allen's vacuum tubes, no bigger than pencil erasers, contained every element found in full-sized radio tubes. By December 1944, American industry was turning out nearly 40,000 proximity fuses each day. Over 100 companies took part, from RCA and General Electric to Sylvania and Crosley Corporation. The program's total cost reached an astonishing $1 billion in 1940s dollars, second only to the Manhattan Project in wartime expenditure. Authorization, crisis, and expansion. Colonel Axelson's unauthorized use of the fuse on December 16 triggered an immediate command uproar. He had defied explicit orders limiting the device strictly to anti-aircraft use, the fear being that a captured fuse might allow the Germans to reverse engineer its secret. But the stunning results at Monshaw were impossible to ignore. The German attack had been halted outright, leaving casualties that shocked even veteran officers. Word of the weapon's success spread rapidly to Supreme Headquarters. Recognizing the desperate state of the Ardennes front, General Eisenhower personally requested approval on December 19. By December 21, all restrictions were lifted, and proximity fuses were cleared for full ground combat use across the entire Bulge battlefield. The speed of deployment that followed showcased unmatched American logistics. Within mere days, proximity fused shells were arriving at artillery batteries all across the Ardennes. The 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion at Bastogne received their supply just as the German noose tightened. The 420th Armored Field Artillery Battalion, firing from their M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers, began using them to defend the northwestern approaches. The 969th Field Artillery Battalion, an African-American unit under Lieutenant Colonel Hubert D. Barnes, employed them with devastating success southwest of Bastogne. Each of these units reached the same conclusion. The proximity fuse had changed everything. Artillery was no longer merely a supporting arm, it had become a decisive weapon. Forward observers no longer needed pinpoint adjustment. The fuse itself determined the perfect detonation height. Accuracy demands fell even as lethality soared. Bastogne, surrounded but superior. The siege of Bastogne became the ultimate test of proximity fuses in defensive warfare. The 101st Airborne Division, surrounded and outnumbered, clung to the vital crossroads under relentless German pressure. Their artillery support, including the 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion, fielded 75 mm pack howitzers firing proximity-fused shells. Between December 19th and 31st, the 463rd fired precisely 7,676 rounds, according to its records. Though not all were proximity-fused, those that were left devastating results in both body and mind. German attack waves disintegrated under airbursts that erased entire platoons within seconds. The December 22nd assault, following General McAuliffe's defiant "nuts" reply to German surrender demands, displayed the weapon's power in full. German infantry moving across open, snow-covered fields in traditional formations were caught mid-advance. The shells burst overhead with clockwork precision, their overlapping cones of shrapnel leaving no refuge. Meanwhile, the all-African-American 969th Battalion added their fire to the defense, their 155 mm howitzers forming a ring of death around Bastogne. Those massive rounds, bursting 50 feet above ground, blanketed vast areas in lethal steel. German prisoners later admitted that units often lost all cohesion before reaching the American line, paralyzed by fear of the invisible explosions that rained from above. The Sauer River slaughter. Perhaps the most vividly recorded example of the proximity fuse's power came along the Sauer River near Echternach on December 25th to 26th. General George S. Patton, whose Third Army was driving north to relieve Bastogne, personally witnessed the event and later described it in War as I Knew It. A German battalion, believing fog and darkness concealed them, attempted a night crossing of the half-frozen river. Conventional artillery would have required time-consuming adjustments, but proximity-fused shells needed none. Patton wrote, "We caught a German battalion crossing the Sauer. The new posit ammunition was devastating. The shells burst in the air above them. They had nowhere to run, the river behind, our fire in front and above. When the firing stopped, we counted 702 bodies." 702 confirmed dead, one of the few precisely documented casualty figures from proximity fuse use. In minutes, a full battalion ceased to exist. No escape, no defense. The psychological shock rippled through German ranks, with many refusing further river-crossing orders. Forest warfare transformed. The Ardennes forests, once Germany's trusted cloak, became killing fields under proximity fire. In open terrain, airbursts at 30 to 50 feet were deadly enough, but among trees, the effect multiplied tenfold. Exploding shells shattered branches into thousands of razor-sharp splinters, each turned into a high-velocity projectile. Veterans who once trusted the protection of trees or dug foxholes beneath thick roots now found those defenses useless. Death came from above, raining both steel and splintered wood, overturning centuries of battlefield wisdom about how to survive artillery fire. The proximity fuse had turned even the forest itself into a weapon. American artillery crews quickly grasped the devastating multiplier effect of the new weapon. A single 155mm shell fitted with a proximity fuse, detonating high above the treetops, could scour an area the size of a tennis court clean of all life. The combination of razor-edged metal fragments and thousands of wooden splinters from shattered branches created a full 360-degree death zone, one that no amount of skill or cover could escape. Veteran German units trained in forest warfare found their hard-earned expertise suddenly meaningless. Spreading out to minimize losses only exposed them to the weapon's massive area of effect. Staying close for mutual support invited annihilation by a single shell. There was no correct tactical answer. No maneuver, no formation that could withstand it. Technical supremacy in motion. To soldiers of the 1940s, the proximity fuse operated on principles bordering on science fiction. Inside each fuse was a miniature radio transmitter, broadcasting at 180 to 220 megahertz, constantly sending out waves that bounced off nearby terrain, trees, vehicles, even human bodies. As the shell drew closer to its target, the returning signal grew stronger. When it reached a precise intensity corresponding to the ideal burst height, an electronic circuit triggered detonation. This intricate system had to survive forces that would obliterate ordinary electronics. When fired, each shell experienced an acceleration of 20,000 times Earth's gravity, enough to flatten a man into dust. The projectile spun at blinding speeds, creating immense centrifugal pressure. Temperatures swung from the 3,000-degree inferno of the gun barrel to freezing cold at the peak of their arc. Yet the tiny vacuum tubes inside, protected by ingenious cushioning, survived with an astonishing 80% reliability rate. Years of testing at Aberdeen Proving Ground determined the ideal detonation heights. For the standard 105mm howitzer, 30 feet proved perfect. The heavier 155mm guns achieved maximum lethality at 50 feet, while the rare 240mm shells, bursting 70 feet above ground, could erase entire grid squares of enemy troops. The results were undeniable. Proximity fuses increased artillery lethality 5 to 10-fold. The effective kill radius expanded 50 times beyond that of traditional ground bursts. Even in anti-aircraft use, the improvement bordered on miraculous. The success rate against German V-1 flying bombs leapt from a meager 17% to a staggering 79% within weeks of adoption. German confusion and intelligence collapse. For German intelligence, failure to comprehend the proximity fuse proved disastrous. In December 1944, Wehrmacht forces captured an American ammunition depot containing roughly 20,000 proximity-fused shells, a goldmine of information. But when German technicians examined the fuses, they dismissed them as a hoax. The idea that fragile vacuum tubes could survive the stress of artillery fire seemed absurd. Convinced the Americans must be using some kind of magnetic trickery, or that the visible components were decoys hiding a secret mechanism, they missed the truth entirely. Ironically, Germany had once led the world in this very field. Before the war, Rheinmetall Borsig and AEG Berlin had both developed working proximity fuse prototypes. But in 1940, Hitler's order to cancel any weapons project requiring more than 6 months for production killed the program. German scientists simply could not believe the Americans had succeeded where they themselves had failed. The irony deepened after the war. Germany's own electrostatic proximity fuses, based on electrical capacitance rather than radar, had achieved 95% reliability in tests. Had their development continued, the Wehrmacht might have deployed such weapons as early as 1941. In post-war interrogations, Hermann Göring admitted German fuses were just 3 or 4 months away from mass production when the war ended. The Christmas catastrophe. December 25, 1944 brought no peace to the front. German troops attempting to use Christmas Day for rest and resupply discovered that proximity fuses respected no ceasefire. Field kitchens, ammunition trucks, and staging areas were obliterated by sudden, unseen bombardments requiring no forward spotters. The 420th Armored Field Artillery Battalion alone fired more than 1,000 rounds that day, the majority fitted with proximity fuses. Their M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers rained accurate fire that struck with terrifying precision. Now artillery could hit unseen targets through fog, snow, or darkness, transforming it from a daytime weapon into a round-the-clock nightmare. The psychological toll was immense. German soldiers who once relied on poor weather or nighttime movement for safety realized there was no sanctuary left. Death could fall from the sky at any hour, heralded only by the faint whistle of a shell seconds before detonation. Malmedy and Skorzeny's elite. On December 21st, SS Colonel Otto Skorzeny's elite commandos launched their daring attempt to seize Malmedy. These were no ordinary soldiers. They were the same men who had rescued Mussolini, nearly captured Tito, and infiltrated Allied lines disguised in American uniforms. They represented Germany's most capable and audacious warriors. Yet even they were helpless before the storm. Proximity-fused shells burst overhead with deadly accuracy, shredding the disguised troops before they could advance. What had begun as a clever deception turned into a massacre. Exact casualty figures remain debated, but the operation collapsed completely, ending Skorzeny's offensive ambitions. For the elite SS commandos, the psychological shock was profound. Men trained to believe in German technological and tactical superiority suddenly faced a reality they could not fight. American science had rendered their courage irrelevant. Some survivors were said to have charged straight toward the American lines, desperate men choosing instant death over another minute beneath the storm of steel. It was the total collapse of discipline among Hitler's most devoted troops. Industrial triumph. The production miracle behind the proximity fuse stood beside any wartime achievement in history. By December 1944, over 100 American companies had retooled entirely for fuse production. Crosley abandoned refrigerators for fuses. Emerson Radio halted home electronics to assemble weapons. Sylvania, RCA, and General Electric devoted entire plants to the project. The result was an industrial orchestra of precision. Quality control surpassed anything seen before in mass manufacturing. Each of the 130 components was tested individually. Every solder joint was examined under magnification. Randomly selected fuses were actually fired to ensure they survived the crushing violence of real combat. The rejection rate was merciless. Any part even slightly imperfect was discarded. The workforce, composed mostly of women working 12-hour shifts 6 days a week, maintained extraordinary precision without even knowing what they were building. Security was absolute. All they knew was that it mattered. By the end of 1944, America was producing one proximity fuse every 2 seconds, continuously day and night. The cost savings were astonishing. In 1942, each fuse cost $732, more than an average worker earned in a year. By December 1944, mass production had reduced that price to just $18 while maintaining flawless quality. This efficiency allowed over 22 million proximity fuses to be produced during the war, with nearly 200,000 used in the Battle of the Bulge alone. Patton's arithmetic. No commander grasped their worth better than General George S. Patton. His Third Army, racing to relieve Bastogne, wielded the proximity fuse as a true breakthrough weapon. His artillery chief, Brigadier General Edward Williams, crafted entirely new tactics around it, including the deadly time-on-target strike, coordinating multiple battalions so every shell arrived at once. When dozens of proximity-fused rounds detonated together at ideal altitude, the result was apocalyptic. German soldiers came to call it the bell toll of death. Between December 22nd and 29th, Patton's guns fired 50,000 such shells, shattering resistance and opening the corridor to Bastogne. Patton himself later wrote, "The funny fuse won the Battle of the Bulge for us." Elsenborn Ridge holds. Nowhere did the proximity fuse prove deadlier than at Elsenborn Ridge. There, the 2nd and 99th Infantry Divisions held crucial ground against the 6th SS Panzer Army, including the feared 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler. Between December 17th and 19th, American artillery unleashed 160,000 rounds, about 40,000 of them proximity fused. Though they made up just 25% of the shells, they caused roughly 60% of the more than 5,000 German casualties. The math told the truth. Proximity fuses had quadrupled American firepower. German troops charging up the steep, forested slopes were met with airbursts so dense that entire companies vanished within seconds. Bodies piled so thick that later waves had to climb over their own dead. After 3 brutal days, the assaults stopped. The elite of the Waffen-SS had been shattered, not by manpower, but by American technology. Operation Bodenplatz's ruin. On January 1, 1945, the Luftwaffe launched Operation Bodenplatte, a desperate strike involving 900 fighters against Allied airfields. The surprise was total. Dozens of Allied aircraft were caught on the ground. But the German pilots' triumph ended as soon as they turned for home. They flew straight into storms of proximity-fused anti-aircraft fire. Of 277 German aircraft lost that day, 172 were downed by flak, most of it using proximity fuses. The kill rate stunned both sides. Luftwaffe pilots, trained to dodge conventional gunnery, found shells bursting exactly where they flew. The Luftwaffe, already crippled, never recovered. Breaking the secret. By January 1945, the secret could no longer be contained. Too many soldiers had witnessed its devastating power. On January 6th, the War Department authorized partial disclosure. The New York Times reported a new type of artillery shell that multiplies American firepower, but omitted any details of how it worked. German intelligence finally understood, but far too late. A January 10th report from Foreign Armies West admitted, "The Americans possess a radio-controlled artillery fuse detonating shells at optimal height for anti-personnel effect. This weapon has caused severe losses in the Ardennes. No effective countermeasures exist." Strategic impact. After the war, even Germany's highest commanders acknowledged the weapon's decisive role. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt confessed, "The proximity fuse was decisive. Our attacks collapsed not because of lack of courage, but because of artillery that seemed to have eyes." General Asso von Manschufel, commander of the 5th Panzer Army, agreed. American artillery was the terror of our troops, especially the new shells that exploded in the air. They caused panic even among veterans. The numbers tell the story. Roughly 200,000 proximity-fused shells fired. Between 15,000 and 20,000 German casualties. Up to 20% of total losses. The fuse made American guns 5 to 10 times more effective, and it worked in fog, rain, or total darkness without spotters. The human cost. Behind those numbers lay grim human stories. Thousands of young German conscripts, many still teenagers, died in ways unimaginable to previous generations of soldiers, hunted by weapons that seemed alive. And on the other side of the ocean, American workers paid their own price. Factory accidents went unreported. Women at Crosley, Emerson, and RCA collapsed from exhaustion or strain. They built machines of unprecedented lethality, without ever being told what they were creating. They carried that secret silently, even after victory. War's arithmetic is cold. Its morality never simple. But the proximity fuse, invisible, precise, and merciless, reshaped the battlefield, and in doing so, helped decide the fate of a world. The Battle of the Bulge claimed 19,000 American lives. But without the proximity fuse, how many more would have fallen? How much longer might the war have dragged on? And how many more victims of the Holocaust would have perished as the fighting continued? Every single day the fuse shortened the war meant thousands freed from camps. Thousands who lived because the end came sooner. Technological legacy. The proximity fuse program didn't just change the battlefield, it transformed technology itself. The miniaturized vacuum tubes designed for its circuits became the foundation for the modern electronics revolution. The meticulous quality control standards created for fuse assembly became industry benchmarks still followed today. The vast coordination of over 100 suppliers pioneered the principles of modern supply chain management. Dr. James Van Allen, who had helped design those tiny vacuum tubes, later applied the same principles of miniaturization to space research, leading to the discovery of Earth's radiation belts. The radar-based principles that powered the fuse evolved into today's advanced radar and sensor systems. And perhaps most remarkably, the idea of a weapon that could sense its environment and make its own decision when to detonate became the ancestor of every guided missile, every smart bomb, every autonomous weapon that now defines modern warfare. The proximity fuse was the first weapon that could think, if only for a moment, the first step toward the era of intelligent machines in combat. The revolution that began in the frozen woods of the Ardennes continues even now, on battlefields dominated by precision-guided munitions and automated systems. Final reckoning. The Battle of the Bulge ended on January 25, 1945, with German forces retreating in ruin. Hitler's last gamble had cost his armies nearly 100,000 casualties, and achieved nothing. American losses reached 75,000. Including 19,000 dead. But without the proximity fuse, those numbers could have been far higher. It had proven itself not merely a weapon, but a war winner. General Eisenhower later remarked that if the Germans had possessed proximity fuses, D-Day might have been exceedingly difficult, perhaps impossible. That statement alone captures the fuse's true strategic weight. It wasn't just an artillery innovation. It was a shift in the very nature of warfare. To the German soldiers who faced proximity-fused artillery, the experience was unlike anything in history. Death arriving from the sky, shells that seemed alive, detonating with unnatural precision, turning the air itself into a weapon. It marked the moment when warfare stepped fully into the technological age. From Colonel Axelson's bold, unauthorized first use on December 16, 1944, to the more than 200,000 shells that thundered across the Ardennes, the proximity fuse became far more than a weapon. It was the perfect fusion of science, industry, and strategy. This small device represented the power of American ingenuity, a blend of precision engineering, scientific daring, and battlefield adaptation that turned the tide of war and redefined what dominance meant. The story of the proximity fuse is one of transformation. Not only technological and tactical, but profoundly human. It proved that innovation could triumph over tyranny, that democracy could outthink dictatorship, and that the true weapon of modern warfare wasn't brute force, it was the mind. In the frozen forests of the Ardennes, the technological age of warfare was born. Tiny radar sets hidden inside artillery shells rewrote the very mathematics of destruction, announcing a new era where science would forever shape the battlefield. The German soldiers who fell beneath those invisible bursts weren't just victims of a single fight. They were witnesses to the dawn of a new kind of war, one that still defines our world today. If you found this story fascinating, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible and untold stories from World War II.